thoughts on how to build your career as a learning and development professional. Also, very much looking forward to having your thoughts as well. I'm a firm believer that no one person in the room is smarter than all of us if we work together. So please, let's work together and let's ensure that we all share our experiences, our thoughts, and our expertise. With that, let me go ahead and share my slides and begin this presentation and the conversation. I always prefer to think of it more as a conversation than a presentation. So I'll be asking quite a few questions in the middle of this presentation. I'll be looking forward to getting your responses. The title is Empower and Evolve in Learning and Development, the idea being that evolving is crucial for all things, but especially in your career. You've got to start off in one direction and continue to grow. Actually, I'm just going to put a quick question in the chat. This is what I normally do at the beginning of a session. Where are you in the world, and what's the weather like where you are? I'll tell you why I'm asking that question in a second. What's the weather like where you are? I'm in West London at the moment. Jasbir is in Malaysia. It's sunny. Philippines, says Carla. I'm in West London, and it is horribly grey outside. It's a typical English winter day. The leaves have come off the trees. It's cold. It's rainy. It's wet. Akash is in Malaysia. It's sunny. And Yoni, Western Australia, it is summer. In Uganda, it's sunny, says Julia. Ming's in Malaysia, humid, says Carla, which is typical for the Philippines. India, sunny. Nixon says, Poon is overcast. Colshall says, it's all coming past very quickly now. Bangalore is rainy. Actually, my memories of India are torn between heat and rain. Rajat, it's cloudy. Delhi, sunny, says Sashwati. Bangalore, Ashwini says it is stopped raining and now the sun's coming through. Fantastic. Joy reports that it is sunny in Nigeria and 26 degrees in Bengaluru, says MD. Fantastic. South Africa, Francois reports that it is a hot 36 degrees centigrade. Thank you very much, everybody. Now, I'll explain later on in the presentation why I asked this question at the beginning. Apart from anything else, though, it is just so good to see people joining us from all over the world. So thank you. We're all part of a community of learning and development professionals. Sadiq reports that in Hyderabad in India, it is a pleasant day. I'm really glad to hear it. Bengaluru again, Jyoti. Great to have you joining us. Let me start with my presentation. I'll quickly introduce myself, although Anjali's already done that. This is me. I do research. I travel the world. I talk about learning and development, and I'm in my 60s. So for me, I have been in this field all my life. I think it's a fabulous, exciting time to be doing learning and development. I wish I had 30 years of career ahead of me. I don't. My career will last, but I want to share and support you. I want to share and support with the learning and development professionals of the future so that I can help build the next generation of learning and development professionals. That's why I'm here. And I'll just drop my LinkedIn notes into the chat. So please, I'm here to support you. I'm here to serve you. Please feel free to link in. At the end of it, I'll also give you a link to, I'll put this link in several times. And if we can link in, I'll send you the slides and I'll send you some other stuff as well. Kang's in Jakarta, and it's rainy in Indonesia. Good to have you with us. So my job is now traveling and doing all these things, but I started my career in 1981 as a computer programmer. This is the computer I programmed, the PDP-11. It is so old that is now in the National Museum of Computing here in the United Kingdom. So it's a I've got a pretty long history with technology. I mention that because this means that I can see perspective. I can see over 3-4 decades what's been happening with learning, what's been happening with technology. We have had some fundamental changes. Those changes will continue. That brings challenge for learning and development, and it brings opportunity for learning and development. So I want to try to share both of those with you. In 1981, I started as a computer programmer. I went traveling in Africa for a year. I went to university. I came out, I graduated, I went to Istanbul. I trained people in English for 5 years. Then I came back to the UK and I answered this advertisement. Are you reasonably good at everything? It was an advertisement to be a computer training person. What's so exciting about this is that it was in a newspaper and you had to write with your CV and put it in an envelope and send it somewhere. I can't imagine anybody writing to respond to an email, to a newspaper advertisement for a job these days. It seems impossible that ever happened. And it's only 30 years ago. But life changes. And I think it's important to remember just how much change there is and how much change there will be. So I want to get you ready for the next 30 years of what's happening in learning development in this presentation. I was successful in applying for this job, and about a year afterwards, in 1993, I was working in a factory in London, teaching people in Excel, because I was a Windows application program trainer at the time, and it was a very it was the time when people were just starting to use Microsoft products. And this was a factory that had been in that place, on that site, for 150 years, making telecommunications equipment. They made cables that went across the Atlantic to carry telecommunications. It was a very old factory. And I was training in the very nice headquarter building, and I looked out the window and I could see the training room. The training room was on the other side of the car park. And between the two, there was the factory itself. And the factory had a gate, one gate where raw materials went in, like plastic and steel, another gate where the finished things came out, the telecommunications cable. When we trained people then in Excel in 1993, they treated it like the factory. People went into the classroom at 9 o'clock, they came out at 5 o'clock, and the idea was their head was full of knowledge and they were ready to do their job. That's not how learning happens now. It's not how training happens now, and that's a good thing. We can do a better job helping people learn. And I want to talk you through what those changes are and how you can develop your career on it. We're going to look at 4 things: what the L&D landscape is like now, some of the skills and knowledge that you're going to require to be a good learning and development professional, the path that will get you there, and finally, I want to look at some advice and some examples from the new world of L&D, people who are doing L&D in a different way. So let's start with that first part of this, the L&D landscape. I'm going to go back to the world of the factory, and I want to ask you a question. I'm going to have a sip of water. I want to ask you a question. What is the role of learning and development? Please answer in the chat. What is the role of L&D? This is fundamental to this whole presentation, so we need to spend a bit of time on it. Please drop your answers into the chat, and I'm going to then discuss what I think we should be doing about this. By the way, we'll have lots of time for Q&A at the end to talk about specifics, but I think this question at the beginning is really important. Jasbir says facilitator. Julia says maximize potential. I'd like to know, Julia, what you mean by potential. Whose potential? Great, 2 great answers, by the way. And Jasbir, if we are a facilitator, what are we facilitating? With who? Bring about behavior change, says Korshal. I love that. Yes, I think we probably are trying to do that. Arrange training per industry requirements to grow the company, says Imran. Increase performance. I'm liking these, says Anthony. Taufik, help talent grow and meet business objectives. That's a great answer. Nixon, empower employees, do their job better. Innovation, development, discovery, says MD. T says support business with required learning. Carla, guide learners. Develop the organization, says Ming. Preeti, to help the business identifying the skills needed for the current and future business needs. I'm loving these answers, and I'm really pleased that we've got this sort of atmosphere going, and this is what you're thinking, because when I ask this question to people, very often the answers are not what you're writing here. They're very restricted, but I think you're showing a bigger picture view of what learning and development is, helping people in the organization grow together, says Tayal. My answer is almost exactly the same as that one. Ashwini, make sure the organization and its people are always open to learning and to facilitate it. This is great stuff. Thank you so much. And Julia says, people in organizations have potential, some of it's untapped. Enable employee skills for organizational development, says Jyoti. All right, listen, you've got there ahead of me. My answer is L&D helps individuals and organizations fulfill their potential, but I think just about every answer that you came up with echoed that. So good, we're all on the same page. The thing is this, I've talked about how things have changed over the past 30, 40 years. This role, what you've just described, what you're talking about, these things haven't changed. I think everything we've described here was true 30 years ago. It will be true 30 years in the future. That's great. I think that what's changed is how we do it. Let me put it another way. The blueprint, the plan we're working to, the thing we're building, which is great people in successful organizations, that's the thing we're building. The blueprint remains the same. What has changed is the tools that we do it with. And by tools, I don't mean, well, I'll tell you what I mean in just a second, but you get the analogy, right? We used to have a drill, now we've got an electric drill, whatever. So let's explore some of those now. When I answered that advert in the paper in 1992, we had a very tight learning and training landscape. It was actually a training landscape more than a learning landscape, because that was what we did. We trained people. The two things we had were content and delivery. Those are the two things we focused on doing. We wrote books, we wrote courses, and that was it. Tools like learning management systems, Jasper, exactly right. Like that's one of the tools we've got. Now, I have this learning landscape that I use to describe what's happening. I just want to make a point. In the bottom right-hand corner, it says, this is not comprehensive and it's not unchanging. In other words, please don't say, why hasn't he included X? I can't include everything on this. What I'm trying to do is focus on the stuff that I think is really important. So if we move to 2024, we've shifted. Content and delivery are two of the things that we do, but I think that L&D, the tools we have to achieve our role of helping individuals and organizations fulfill their potential, the tools we have are now in 5 buckets. We have content, we have delivery, but we also have community, performance, data, and skills. I mention this because there's a lot that we can do in L&D in content and delivery, but that is not all we can do. And I firmly believe that in the organizations of the future, delivering content is going to become less and less important for learning and development, and the other things will become more important. Content will become less important because it's much easier to create content now, much easier than it ever was, and people do it. People in the workforce are creating content and sharing it already. Now, it may not be good, and perhaps our role with content is not so much to control and produce the content ourselves, but to facilitate and edit the content that other people produce. There's also a tremendous amount of content available in the world generally. So within the organization, we have it. Outside, we have it as well. That means that if we think that we're the people who should produce all the content, we are stopping people getting to some really good stuff. But there is other stuff that we should be doing. Jasper, I like what you're saying here about capability building. Stay with me as I go through this. On the content and delivery side, I think this in 2024, this is much of the stuff that we do. We deal with content creation and course design, but we also do other things as well around here. So we're doing things around curation, increasingly personalization, adaptive delivery, and so on become important parts of what we're doing. But also, what about the rest of the circle? And there's a whole bunch of stuff that I think I think it's just coming into people's perception now. So when Jasbir says capability building, I think skills-based talent management is an important part of that. Our role is to build capability for the organization for the future. We now have the tools which we didn't have 30 years ago to enable us to look across the organization, understand skills, analyze that, and work with senior people in the organization to say, to answer three questions. What skills do we need? What skills do we have? And how do we get from here to there? That capability building, I describe it in three questions very simply. It's enormously complicated doing it, but the capability building is done in line with what senior people in the organization say. And that's a theme we're going to come back to again and again in terms of what you can do to best build your career in L&D. So the skills bit is really important. There are all these other things as well around the edge that we can do. Something that people aren't doing enough of at the moment is helping other people learn from each other, either in collaborative work on projects or peer-to-peer learning just in the regular flow of work. Mentoring and expert support through coaching, and in particular, these two things being supported by artificial intelligence is a huge growing area. Simulation, supported by artificial intelligence. Performance support, supported by artificial intelligence. These areas are definitely growing areas that we need to be aware of. And if you think that our job is to help people do their jobs better, now and in the future, these are tools that we can use that don't really have a great deal to do with the business of creating content. So I'm spending time here because I just want to help you to reinforce the point that we've come from an area traditionally where I started in the past where people could only get to information through the person at the front of the classroom. And that's changed. The information is out there. Other people are out there that people can connect with directly. And by connecting with those people, they learn. So they learn from materials in the world. They learn from people in the world. It's our job to facilitate that conversation as rapidly as possible. And I love the fact that the very first answer we got was from Jasbir saying facilitator. Yes, that's our job, to facilitate people's learning in many ways, through reaching to people, through reaching to content. And that doesn't mean that we have to be the bottleneck. In fact, we should try not to be the bottleneck. I talk about this business of change over time, and I've spent 10 minutes now talking about it, 15 minutes, that it all can be wrapped up with one phrase. We want to get to a place in the future where we are effective learning and development professionals with great careers for the future. To do that, we've got to remember that what we did in the past doesn't necessarily apply in the future. So what got us here as good L&D professionals won't necessarily get us there. Okay, point one has been done. Let's move on to our second of four things, skills and knowledge. This is a library in Prague, a monastery in Prague. It's a particularly beautiful building. But the sad thing is, of course, all these books are in a museum. Nobody takes them down off the shelf anymore and reads them. This tells me that we're in a position whereby the old world of how we conveyed knowledge, unfortunately, is changing. I say unfortunately because I'm a great believer in books, but unfortunately it's changing. There is an issue here for learning and development. The issue is this, what I call the classroom paradox. It's not actually a paradox. I should really call it the classroom misapprehension. Here's the problem. This classroom is a historical classroom in a museum in Norfolk in England. It looks, and this is from the late 19th century. So it's about 130 years old. It looks exactly like the classroom that I went to as a young man. And the only thing that's different is that the picture at the end of the class is of Queen Victoria rather than Queen Elizabeth. And my kids going to school had the same classroom, except these were modern tables and there probably was no picture of the Queen in them. But the fact is, that it was the same arrangement. Now, the issue here is that the way that the world sees our profession of learning and development is like this. They see that people who deliver training are the same as teachers. And there's a series of steps they have in their minds which are wrong, but are firmly entrenched about how people learn and how problems can be solved. You have a problem with performance. That means there needs to be a skill or a knowledge input. That means there has to be a course. That course has to take place in an environment, online or face-to-face, and that's it. So we go from performance problem through to course in a classroom, and there's no thinking about it. It's an automatic leap from one to the other. And the reason there's no thinking about it is that just about everybody in the world, for at least 10 years, from the ages of 5 to 15 typically, and very often for much longer, everybody, regardless of their color, their religion, their beliefs, their background, their class, all do the same thing. So everybody goes through this process, and there's this tacit belief across the workforce, across leadership, that this is what our job is, teaching people. And it absolutely isn't. Our job is, as we've discussed, facilitating people to learn and be better and more productive in line with the business. So we have a conundrum here, and I think we have to then step back from that and ask ourselves, all right, if that's what the world thinks about us, and it's very often what learning and development thinks about itself, oh, I'm a teacher. And, I was a teacher. I was a teacher when we couldn't do it any other way. Things have changed. So if I just bear that in mind as the setting, I want to ask you a question. I'm going to have a sip of water. What do you think are the key skills for learning and development practitioners for the future? That's the past. That picture is the past. The idea of us as trainers, as teachers, is in the past. So what should we be doing in the future? I'm going to have my sip of water. Agile, enable collaboration. Preeti, I like that. I'm always loving it when we get great contributions. Agile. Oh, and we have to be technologically savvy, Jasbir adds. That's an important one. Thank you. Yes. Resourceful as well, people management, design thinking. And we have, as Madiha says, to be fluid, to be open to change, able to change, in fact, if we possibly can be. I like that. Preeti is very specific. AI-oriented solutions to learning requirements. Quickly access trainee skills. Yes, Nixon, we have to know what's going on. Analytics. Data is the key, Jyothi says. So data analytics. By the way, these are great answers. I'm going to come back to some of these at the end. Sadiq adds, understand the landscape and the varied requirements across multiple locations and time zones. And that's a really good point, that very often we're working online and we've got multiple cultures, multiple languages, multiple time zones. Disha, improve the method to capture learn level and the learning needs. Yes, because that's the opposite of teaching. When you do the same thing for everybody, you start from where the person is. Ashwini, I like that. Be open to learning ourselves. Multiple topics in one training. Digital fluency, Ravi says. Emotional. Okay, I'm loving this. I'm loving all the thoughts. Thank you. Impart knowledge without exhausting ourselves. By the way, that's a really good point, Taufik. And I think it can be utterly exhausting doing this stuff. Okay. I'm going to come back to some of this at the end, because you're raising a lot of points that I asked people for advice for this webinar 36 hours ago, and I got some great advice. So I'll share some of this with you as well. For me, and I designed 10 years ago. I designed a competency framework for learning and development professionals, which was 26 skills for the learning and development department of the future. So one of those was obviously designing materials, but there were other skills as well, which people, which we haven't raised here, which I'd like to just bring up, one of which is marketing. Now, that sounds a bit strange. I don't mean marketing like producing posters, but I mean marketing in the sense that we need to be able to persuade people, if we've got something, that they should be interested in doing it. And that's much more than simply sending an email to people. It's a complicated business of understanding the people in an organization and listening to them and persuading them. It's also another skill, crucial skill for learning and development people, I believe, is performance consulting. The ability to go to an organization, anywhere in your organization, talk to people and listen. As Jasbir says, be an influencer, be able to be a negotiator. Jasbir, the competencies can be shared here. Yes, okay, listen, I will put those, sorry, I don't have them to hand. What I'll do is I'll just make you a note. I'll share those competencies on a blog on my website, and then you can see them all. That'll be quite a quick job. I just don't have them here easily to hand over. Blog, LPI, CapMap. Okay, thank you for that. Yes. Look, Jasbir has written influence and negotiations. Yes, and it goes along with Zegundino's point about emotional intelligence. This ability to go out, communicate with people, listen to them. If you're in an organization, so much of what we do is involved in understanding what the needs of the business are, the needs of the business and the needs of the individual. Remember, we help individuals and organizations fulfill their potential. That means being able to listen really well and then being able to ask really good questions to find out at an individual level, does somebody get it? Are they developing themselves? At an organizational level, what are the problems? What are the real problems? And how do we tackle those? A great listener, absolutely, really, really important. So this is the capability map at the moment. I'm just going to go and see if I can get that URL up. And I'll drop that in. I have no financial interest whatsoever, by the way, in this. So please go and have a look at the capability map. It has changed since I designed it, and it is it's new. It looks like there's now a system for doing it, for using it. But please, by all means, have a look at the capability map. That's not the only way, of course, that we can develop ourselves, and it's not the only thing we should be developing. As well as skills, we need to be developing our knowledge. And for me, reading is a crucial part of developing ourselves. That's why I've got all these books behind me. These books are about, there are probably 4 times as many books as that in this room on the other walls. Okay, now I haven't read them all necessarily, but I have read most of them. And it's a matter of us developing ourselves. I've just given a selection here of books that I think are important. And the authors are, I'll put the authors in here, because these are people who are worth reading. And they're just examples. But Julie Dirksen on learning design is absolutely phenomenal. Miriam Nealon on science and the science of thinking and learning, how that influences learning design. Nigel Payne on anything to do with organizational learning, and Stella Collins on the mind. These are all people worth learning from. And workplace learning, well, Madiha, Nigel Payne is your man for that. These books are largely published by Kogan Page. So Kogan Page is the publisher. Again, I have this is my book, Learning Technologies in the Workplace. Okay, so that's also published by Kogan Page, but I have no particular financial interest in this. I'm just sharing it because I know these books are super useful. I know the authors and they're great. So we need to develop our skills, all those things we just talked about, and we absolutely need to develop our knowledge. And I'm going to ask you a question. You know it's going to happen. You must be reading something. What are you reading? Could be books, could be something else, could be blogs. Is there anything that you'd recommend that people read? Because we've got 50 people here at least. And when you've got that many people, some people are going to have some great ideas to share. So if you've got some great knowledge to share about books that you can recommend to people, please throw it in there. Then I'm going to share some of the inspirational stuff that I've got from other people and ideas that other people are putting forward. So please let us know, what books would you recommend, or blogs, or anything else that you're reading. or podcasts, indeed. Learning in the meta world. Okay. It's new to me. Oh, mindset. Yeah, mindset. That's great. Oh, Jocelyn runs a podcast, Stars of Learning. Cool. I would love to be on that. If you want to send me an email, that'd be great. Sorry, I'm suggesting I'm a star. I'm not saying I'm a star, but I'd love to be on a podcast if possible. Great. Outliers. Yes. Now, look, Carlos raised a really good point here. The books I put up there are all learning books, but you know what? There are plenty of books worth reading that expand our minds and make us better people and better professionals, which don't have anything to do with learning in the title. Some great examples here. Outliers is a good book. Yep. Performance analytics, yes, Jasper. Think and Grow Rich, of course. Business training, I don't know that one, Anthony. Tom Bird, Jeremy Kessel, but please. Yes, now e-learning newsletter for updates. Madiha, thank you. I hadn't mentioned actually here newsletters. It's a great point. There is a lot of really useful stuff that can be learned from newsletters and definitely worth subscribing to. Fabulous, thank you. I want to look now at our path forward on, yeah, I've got a whole book list on performance analytics. I'll tell you what, Yasby, I think I'm going to have to, as a follow-up to this, write a whole bunch of stuff on my blog, just as a sort of support center for people who want to do this stuff. So I'll take an action to do book lists, book and blog and podcast lists. I'll absolutely do that and take it away. And also I've got a report list, which I can share with you. I'll put all these on my blog and you just go there and download it. Oh, what a great book. Telling Ain't Training. Yes. Make it stick. Make it stick. Great. And look, you see, this is why it's so useful doing stuff online. I mean, I know doing stuff online has its problems. But when I was starting to do this, when I was starting in the world of training, the idea that I could simply ask a question and people from countries across the world would share their insight, their knowledge, it would never happen. And it's extraordinary. We take it for granted, but it's extraordinary what we're doing right now. It's brilliant. And I think this business of being able to share information so easily is something we should never underestimate. Cool. Let's talk about, read reports. What about myself? I've done 4 reports in the past year. There they are. And I would love you to please, I'll just drop those links in the chat. You should be able to just go and download those reports. I've got 3 reports on the use of AI in learning and development, and also my global sentiment survey for the year. So that's 4 reports I've done in the past year, which I would say are worth reading. That's immodest of me. I have a co-author, Egla Vinauskaite, who is superb. And apart from anything else, I'd love you to just read it for her benefit because she's so good. And isn't it great that we should read things that go beyond the learning and development field? I haven't read anything by Mahatma Gandhi, and I probably should. So thank you. Thank you very much, Medea. Let's talk about our path to building a great L&D career. I consciously, when I left university, I graduated from Oxford University. I had a degree in politics, philosophy, and economics. And all my friends were going into banking. And I really didn't want to do that. And I went and got myself a qualification as an English language teacher. And I went to Istanbul. And I taught English for 5 years. And I did other things while I was there as well. And in fact, I've done a lot of things in my life which are only related to L&D on the side: publishing, writing, creating a guide to Istanbul. I worked in sales in Chicago on the telephone for 3 months between university and getting trained. So I've done a lot of different things in L&D. But I've always had this thing in mind at the end, which is make sure you're being useful to other people, helping other people build. So for me, that's my pole star. When I talk about the path in your career, the path goes like this. It bends and it winds, and then you get somewhere and you look back and you say, oh, all those things I did on the journey here, they all make sense now. On the way, it doesn't make sense necessarily. My guiding principle would be on the path of your career, do experiments, try things. Let's see, I'm excited by this. I'm interested in it. I think there's opportunity. I'll do this thing. If it works, keep doing it. Importantly, if it doesn't work, if it doesn't give you time to spend with your friends and family, if it's bad for you and your mental health, if you just find it doesn't do what you're expecting it to do, stop. So that's my advice, is experiment and keep doing the things that work, stop doing the things that don't work. And that gets you the path that leads to the place where, looking back, you say, I have learned at every stage, from the experiments, from the successes and the failures, they get me to where I am now. That's all very philosophical. Let's be a bit more. Grit and tenacity are important, Jasbir, absolutely. But I would add that there's no point keeping doing something if it's killing you. There really isn't. There's no point doing something if it's not going to produce something at the end of it. So grit and tenacity are crucial, absolutely. But so is knowing when to stop. It's not a popular thing to say. But in my experience, and I'm sharing this because I can look back over my career, in my experience and looking at other people, it's the people who decide that actually that idea didn't work. And I can count lots of failures in my career. That idea didn't work, and I'm going to move on. I'm going to leave it, and I've learned something from it. Sometimes you actually, and that happened this morning for me, sometimes you do something where you think, hey, that thing I thought was a failure, in my case, 5 years ago, has actually turned out to be really useful because something I created turns out to be an asset for me. So nothing's really a failure. I want to talk about the path to professionalism. There's a spectrum. You've got more time and cost on one side and greater recognition. So if you have a degree from Harvard, that's more recognition than something informal. But there is value on all of these things. So on the one side, you've got degrees, and on the other side, you've got loose networks. All of these things are useful for developing yourself. They're also useful for developing your career. As we look across this, and you can recognize this, you might move things around a bit, but I think these are probably the sort of things we're looking at. And I would say that of these things, that you can put things underneath each of these categories. I haven't put anything underneath conferences because I chair a lot of conferences myself, and I don't want to try to persuade you to attend my conferences. And professional qualifications and bodies, I used to chair an institute in the UK, so I don't want to promote that. But you can see there are things in each of these categories. I put Kogan Page as an example, obviously GSDC for certifications and courses and webinars. Middlesex University gave me an honorary doctorate for my work in developing the learning and development profession. They do great work in providing doctorates and formal qualifications at a very high level for people working in learning and development. So all that's fine, but the stuff you might not be thinking about so much when you think about developing yourself is the stuff on the right-hand side, the networks. Now, Twitter, now X, used to be incredibly useful for this. It is much less useful now. I don't say that with any political or other meaning. It is simply the case that if I post something on Twitter, where I have 13,500 followers, I get very little response. If I post something on Blue Sky, which is the new alternative to Twitter, where I have 700 followers, I get an immediate response. So let me show you how that works. 36 hours ago, I said, I'm doing this webinar. I'd like to share your thoughts with the people in the room. And this is what I put up. I'm doing a webinar on Thursday for people beginning a career. I'm not sure if you're all beginning a career, but anyway, people pursuing a career in learning development. And I asked them, what would you like to offer as your advice? Bang, the network came back. And there were 3 different things that they pointed out that I really want to stress to you as we get close to wrapping up this webinar. Firstly, focus on the business. This was a really strong theme, and relationships. This is something I've been talking about for a number of years, but really, if we want to work in the business and we want to be successful, that success relies on relationships. Do not make your first conversation with somebody a request for help. Make your first conversation with somebody, they could be in marketing, they could be in IT, they could be in sales, whoever they are, get to know them and make the first conversation. Do you want a coffee? Do you want to sit down, have a chat? Can I come and watch you doing your job? I just want to understand how things happen in this business. That's one thing. There's also, you can see Matty talking here about investing your time, and in particular, the business of data. Data is a really common theme in these, and it comes up again and again. And I love Gretchen. Relationships are the key to success. And I love JD's one. Be obsessed with problems, not solutions. And Yasbir points out in the chat, connect. Why do you connect? To build trust. Absolutely. That's why you're doing it. And trust comes, it's a two-way street, a relationship. You want something from somebody in the future, but you must also be ready to give them something as well. So build that trust in that relationship. My favorite one of this was, be curious about the theory of learning and development, some of those books I gave you, but also about the context. And this is crucial. What do people in the business actually do? Speak to people, network, and find out what the pain points are. The context is crucial for everything. Okay. Secondly, you've got to understand learning and development and learning itself. So, and to constantly be looking at how do we do things right? Become obsessed with your subject matter, never blag it. Blag is an English word that means make it up. Don't make it up. Be an expert in our field and develop yourself. Get a mentor. Brendan, I know very well. He's a young man. He's got a lot of snappy answers here. Be curious, says Keith. And look, Neil used to be an actor, and he went into training, and he realized that it's not a performance. It's about helping people. It's not about you. I love that as an answer from Neil. All right. Let's talk quickly about the new world of L&D, then let's do some Q&A. I occasionally get very depressed about nothing changing in learning and development. Then I meet people who are doing things differently. And here's just some of the people who are doing a great job. Jeff Kortenbosch, I met him 6 years ago at a conference. He said the next day after leaving the conference, he came out and he went back to his office in the Netherlands, and he said, right, we're going to stop writing courses. That doesn't help us fulfill our role of helping individuals and organizations succeed. And he wrote a book. The book is 20 questions to ask before providing training. And question 1 was, what's the problem you're trying to address? And it's a great, great question to ask. So that's his approach is, you can do training, but as a result of asking these 20 questions, he reduced the number of courses that they provided by about 60%. Anka Iodake has done a great job. She's not at City anymore, but at City, she did a great job with helping people on a number of programs learn not from content, but from each other. She produced structured ways of getting people to come together and learn from each other by doing a series of challenges over the course of a period. Very successful and not requiring learning in instructional design, but rather experience design. Communities of practice absolutely were part of this. We're going up the scale here of people with seniority. So Jeff was just a guy by himself. Anka is somebody running a department. Guy Wilmshurst-Smith runs training for Network Rail that look after the railway system in the UK, has 600 people in his team. He is close to the business, and he talks to them not about training, but about data. Remember what those people on Blue Sky were saying? They were saying how important data is and relationships. Those two things together, he gets close to the business, and he has what he calls data conversations. He talks to them, and he says, if we do this thing here, train up your team on whatever, it will result in, and he can talk about the benefits backed up by the data of his system and his processes that will mean that the trains will run better on that track. And that's what people want to hear. They don't care about the training. They do care about the organizational performance. So he is able to supply better services to them. I want to just give a shout out to Michelle Ockers. There's a bunch of resources at the end of this slide deck. She's just a consultant. She's a very good consultant. I worked with her on producing the capability map, that list of skills I talked about earlier. I would absolutely recommend her Learning Uncut podcast. That's going to be in the resources area. And finally, at the top of the pyramid of seniority of people I've talked to recently, Heather Stefanski. She runs training for McKinsey, very successful international partnership consultants. I said to her, Heather, you must have an awful lot to do. How do you know if you're being successful? And she said, Donald, I look at my diary. I said, what? I look at my diary and I ask myself, am I spending at least 50% of my time outside the training department talking to people and understanding what the business is? I thought that was an amazing answer for somebody who has so much responsibility. She comes back to that point about relationships and building that trust to understand the business so that you know when and where you can deliver, but also you can get involved much earlier in the program. It is brilliant, actually. I love it. So we should never forget why we came into this in the first place. It's, of course, to inspire where learning happens, which is inside individuals. So we work with these people. And of course, the organization is successful. And at the beginning, we said, what's the role of L&D? It is to help individuals and organizations, but without the individuals, you don't have an organization. So always let us remember that our role is to start with the individual to help them, and that will help the organization fulfill their potential. I'm going to close with a QR code. That's me on LinkedIn. If you can follow, I realize I made a lot of promises here.